And so a healthy stem cell reservoir is your best assurance, guarantee that you can weather any physiologic, anatomic challenge that might occur. If you tear a muscle, you need stem cells to repair that muscle tear. If you break a bone, you need stem cells to remodel that bone tissue. If you wind up having a small mini stroke, you need stem cells to help suppress the deterioration of that tissue and restore functionality. So what we know for a fact is that the way you maintain the highest quality stem cells are the general tools you use to protect your overall health.
Dr. Bob Hariri, you are one of the world's leading stem cell experts. I would definitely go so far as saying that. And I've been fascinated by stem cells for a long time, but the problem with talking about them online is they seem so massively unattainable for most people. You're thinking this is ridiculous. I could never in my life be able to do this. There's no denying they're effective, but what can people do as far as stem cells, maybe that are already in their body, and being able to get more out of them for better aging, better recovery, repair, you name it?
I put a link down below for a 30% off discount link for Thrive Market, which is an online grocery store. Like, you can get dairy snacks. You could literally get like cheese crisps. You can get all kinds of things, right? They are a quote unquote better for you option online grocery store. So you can do all your grocery shopping online. Plus, when you're using that link down below, that's saving you 30% off your entire first grocery order. So everything you load up in your cart, 30% off plus a free $60 gift. But the thing is it makes it easy. You're not going to the grocery store and trying to find things and having to spend 2 hours. You can search. You can search by diet type. You can search by type of food, by dairy. You can search by sugar-free. It really makes doing the more complicated type of healthy shopping really easy. And it makes it much more affordable, and it makes it accessible. And I know that people are not always keen on online shopping for groceries, but I suggest you try it because it is a game changer.
So, Tom, if we think about it, stem cells 101, people should understand that stem cells are a fundamental part of all of our biology. We originate after fertilization of the egg and sperm. We originate as a single cell, what's called a totipotent stem cell, that gives rise to trillions of cells in our lifetime. And each one of those cells can be traced back to the origins that actually wind up kind of being the leftovers of a full-term healthy pregnancy in the placenta, that organ that's discarded. And so the way I got into stem cells many, many years ago as a doctor interested in the treatment of traumatic brain injury was, could stem cells be the cornerstone of restoring function to badly injured brain and spinal cord patients? And so let me take a step back and just explain what a stem cell is. Stem cells are unique in the fact that they conserve the ability to mature and specialize into any of the unique cell types that make up the tissues and organs of our body. So from that original totipotent cell, you're going to give rise to cells that will eventually give into creating blood cells, immune cells, bone cells, muscle cells, brain cells. So if you think about it, all those specialized forms take on very different functional characteristics. And it's all driven by the availability of stem cells to continually renew and renovate you during your lifetime. So people get interested in stem cells because it's the building block and the repair tool that nature uses to create us and maintain us. Now, in my world, and if you go back 30 years, I said, well, stem cells have the potential to transform the way we treat disease. The challenge was, unless someone approached this and industrialized the creation of stem cells like a therapeutic, like a pharmaceutical, we'd never be able to scalably deploy it to everyone who needs it, okay? If you may remember, if you go back 30 years, when stem cells were first emerging in the scientific literature, it was all about...
I was watching cartoons when I was 30.
Rub it in, okay? I was in the heyday trying to figure out, well, if we can only get stem cells from embryos or the byproducts of an abortion, that was going to limit the future and potential of this field. And so I give my oldest daughter credit. When she was in utero, and I was a young surgeon, I broke from the surgical ICU to run down and look at the ultrasound, and it dawned on me, looking at this peanut-sized embryo that was to become my daughter, that the placenta was already a big organ. And the placenta, it dawned on me, had to be playing a role in the successful completion of that pregnancy. And maybe it wasn't just a connection, a vascular connection between mom and the developing fetus, but maybe it was a supply depot. And it was where stem cells were being manufactured and trafficking to the developing fetus. So that was what gave me the epiphany that I could create an industry in cellular medicine grounded in the leftovers of a full-term pregnancy that's going to be discarded. And so that's how I got excited about this field. And what it's taught me in the last 30 years is that stem cells are a far more important tool than originally thought. You may remember that bone marrow transplantation, replacing the blood-forming cells of our bone marrow, is a stem cell therapy. But in those circumstances, you're trying to replace a defective, diseased bone marrow with something that's normal and doesn't have the disease. So you want to treat leukemia or some form of cancer by washing out the bad bone marrow and replacing it with new stem cells. That gave rise to us saying, okay, if I have available stem cells and I can put them into a system that's defective, it could correct the defect. And so everybody today recognizes that stem cells can, in fact, be the foundation to stimulate the normal repair, regeneration, and renewal of our tissues and organs during our lifetime. So if you can get access to them, that's a positive thing. The challenge for everybody is, in its history being developed as a therapeutic, it's going through the challenges of proving to the scientific, clinical, and regulatory communities that this is safe and effective and predictable. That's one fundamental challenge. The other challenge is doing it in a way that it's economically accessible by everybody. You know, my partner, Peter Diamandis, often talks about the need for democratizing technology. Well, you can't do that if the product's going to cost $1 million a dose. Yeah. So I was very fortunate that discovery that the placenta was in fact this highly renewable, available, ethically available raw material. And from a placenta, I could isolate so many stem cells and produce so many doses of cells from it, gave rise to the programs we've created that literally create living cells as medicines in a factory, in an industrialized system. Now, the beauty of that is it allows us to explore all the potential applications of stem cells in medicine. The future is going to be to use these cells to maintain our quality of health as we age and to defeat the accumulated problems that occur with aging, like frailty, like muscle loss, sarcopenia, like dementia, like immune dysfunction. All those things are combatable using stem cells. The challenge is make them available like a traditional therapeutic and make them affordable.
Yeah, which is going to be a path for sure. And if we did another video where we were talking about stem cells sort of briefly as a part of this other topic that we talked about. And you mentioned something really interesting. And we were talking about muscle, we were talking about vascularization, we were talking about stem cells. And so it seems as though there might be a link between muscle mass and having more just vascularization and more blood flow and stem cells. So let's say in the interim, while we're waiting for a lot of this to happen, can you explain maybe some natural ways that people can, I don't want to say increase stem cell production, but just understand how this is working in their body to a point where maybe they can maximize it a little bit more?
So everyone should know that stem cells exist and reside in every organ and tissue of the body. They take up little compartments there and they lay in wait, and they get called upon to traffic to, replace, and renovate organs and tissues during our lifetime. And so a healthy stem cell reservoir is your best assurance, guarantee that you can weather any physiologic, anatomic challenge that might occur. If you tear a muscle, you need stem cells to repair that muscle tear. If you break a bone, you need stem cells to remodel that bone tissue. If you wind up having a small mini stroke, you need stem cells to help suppress the the deterioration of that tissue and restore functionality. So what we know for a fact is that the way you maintain the highest quality stem cells are the general tools you use to protect your overall health. You want to have plenty of exercise and sleep. Exercise is critically important because muscle tissue is a reservoir of accessible stem cells in the vascular system of that organ. And you want to make sure that you don't subject those stem cells to any of the things which cause kind of sustained damage. You want to avoid chemical exposures. You want to avoid exposure to ionizing radiation. You want to avoid exposure to viruses which can damage stem cells by disrupting DNA. And so as long as you avoid things, the common sense stuff, the same things that damage your healthy mature cells can damage the stem cell pool you've got as well. So that's one obvious thing. The other tool to keep in mind is there are ways today to collect stem cells and store them away for yourself for later in life. The industry of banking stem cells at birth has been around for 30 some odd years, and that we know works. I can store stem cells recovered from the leftovers of a placenta or cord blood, the leftover blood in the umbilical cord. I can store those away in cryopreservation for decades. And they're in a state of suspended animation, and they can be called upon to augment or boost your population of stem cells that reside in your body. Think about the possibility that even adults can do that. And so we're very excited about some of the things we're doing at Cellularity, one of my therapeutics company, and Fountain Life, our clinic-based company, at being able to offer adults an opportunity to, over time, collect some of their own stem cells just from peripheral blood, process those, and store those away for the future applications that are evolving today. Things like immunotherapy for treating cancer and immunologic disease, augmentative therapy to address age-related muscle loss or aesthetic changes. These are all at the fingertips of people, and all they need to do is reach out. They can take a look at our book Life Force, where we talk about this. They can reach out to Fountain Life or Cellularity and learn more about it online. Or they can follow, for example, some of the things we publish in the scientific and clinical literature.
If we, which is all extremely interesting, I think that's what's exciting about that, is that it's potentially affordable for people. This is not something that's completely out of the realm of possibility. I've heard of this phrase like rehoming before. Is that so? Do stem cells go back to a place where they kind of live and then they come out? Explain how that sort of works. 'Cause I've heard fasting can have some impact on stem cells in certain ways, like through like rehoming or something like that. And I'm not an expert in this, but how does that work? And maybe where does nutrient deprivation or periodic fractal eating or time restricted eating, possibly come into play with stem cell function?
So you're asking some really important questions. Number one, as we develop from an embryo to a fetus to a newborn and throughout our lifetime, every organ and tissue of our body is constructed by a population of cells that start out as stem cells, differentiating, which is maturing and specializing, and then taking up residence in the tissue in a specific position. I often say, every tissue in the body is a template, a structural template populated by cells. Those cells all come from the stem population that either resided in us as a fetus or resided in our tissues as we age, and they are called upon to renovate and renew us during our lifetime. The homing process, which you talked about, is all about chemical signals that call out and say to a stem cell that's quiescent, not doing anything, and said, hey, I need you here. And so that signal, which is similar to some of the chemical signals in the inflammatory process, will actually recruit the cell to detach from its location. That location may be a small blood vessel and muscle. It may be the bone marrow. It may be in your adipose tissue. And when it detaches from that stationary position, it gets into the circulation or the lymphatics and finds its way back to the site where that signal arose from. So I'll give you an example. If you have a muscle injury, what happens after an injury? You get pain. Pain is an indication of inflammation. Inflammation is in certain types of cells from your immune system go there to clean up the damage. While they're there cleaning up the damage, they're releasing chemicals that say, hey, I need new cells to replace this tissue. And those cells come from the stem population that either resides locally in muscle, or in some cases, it may come from the bone marrow. And that's the homing process you were talking about. So it's very interesting. The stem population is very, very good at following discrete chemical messages. It's sort of like the inflammatory cells leave out breadcrumbs, and the stem cells follow those breadcrumbs back to the place they need to be active. And when they get there, they go through a process of maturation, in some cases division, where they expand their numbers, and then specialization, where they mature and they take on those new formats of muscle tissue. What's interesting is that since most stem cells reside in what's called a versatile form, they're either multipotent, where they can become different types of tissue, or pluripotent, where they can become all types of tissue. What's interesting is the process going from a stem cell to a mature muscle cell is a series of cell divisions, and each cell division driving towards a muscle cell is a series of gene silencing events. What do I mean by that? A gene silencing event is that if you've got 25,000 genes in your genome, but you only need 10,000 of them to be a functioning muscle cell, each cell division towards a muscle cell takes some of that genetic material and kind of sequesters it so it's not red. And what that does is it creates a mature phenotype, a mature form that's very specialized and very efficient. And when you get to that terminal form, it performs its function flawlessly.
Interesting. So if there's these multipotent and like pluripotent, is there such thing as like a monopotent? Are there types of stem cells that are only for one specific thing?
Along the continuum from a pluripotent cell, which keeps all that versatility, towards a terminal phenotype, a final perfect form, each one of those cell divisions takes out some of that versatility. So it goes from pluripotent to multipotent to unipotent, just like you said. In the unipotent form, it's really good at making that final perfect specialized muscle cell. And by the way, when it gets there, it can't turn back. That's one of the things we know. Mature, differentiated, specialized cell types are not stem cells. They can't go back. Although a brilliant guy named Yamanaka, who won the Nobel Prize, figured out that you can induce a state of pluripotency in a mature cell type using some things called Yamanaka factors. These are molecules that kind of turn back the potency of a mature cell so it can behave like a stem cell. That's called induced pluripotent stem cells, iPSCs. So there is hope that even from mature cells, you can create pluripotency. But I'm here to tell you that that's unnecessary if you've already been smart enough to store away a supply of your own cells that already have that functionality.
So a unipotent stem cell, I would assume, is so specialized that there's probably not like a clinical use case for a unipotent. I would imagine it gets so specialized at that point. Or could there be a time in the future where like we could actually say like, no, this is hyper targeted for this very specific thing? What's the case there?
So let me give you an example. If I take hematopoietic stem cells, those are stem cells that are designed to make all the different blood cells, platelets, red blood cells, white blood cells. If I take that hematopoietic stem cell and I make a T lymphocyte, that's a type of a white blood cell. Okay, that's a unipotent cell. I can use that unipotent cell to treat cancer in something called CAR T therapy. I can take a T cell that is generated from a hematopoietic stem cell. It's now unipotent, it's specialized, and I can engineer in a characteristic to make it a perfect cancer-killing immune cell. CAR T therapy, which stands for chimeric antigen receptor T cells. What we figured out a long time ago, a good friend of mine and a brilliant scientist, Carl June, figured out that you can engineer in a corresponding lock and key connection between the immune cell and a cancer cell. And if you do that, it's a heat-seeking missile. And so by creating from a stem cell a population of unipotent T cells and then engineering them, you've got a perfect clinical tool to treat cancer.
Wow, that is wild, man. I want to pivot for a second into, I don't know if this is an area that you're familiar with gut stem cells. The only reason I'm aware of gut stem cells is because I don't know what journal it was offhand. There were a couple really fascinating fasting studies with gut stem cells specifically. Basically, when you were giving the gut a break, you would have this increase in gut stem cells. So we have these stem cells, obviously they're everywhere. How active in the gut are they? Because this is obviously so much starts in the gut. You've got this other whole world of research coming out now, basically epicentering so much of our health in our gut. I could see how there could be an intersect there.
So it turns out that there are certain cell types in the body that are continually dividing and renovating and renewing themselves over and over. They're rapidly dividing cell types. The lining of the gastrointestinal system, the gut cells, are in fact one of those cell types. They are always renewing the lining of the gut. And so they're very, very active. Other areas where you've got this continual renewal process is skin, hair. If people are exposed to radiation, the things that get damaged are the ones that are rapidly dividing cells. That's why you lose your hair when you have radiation for cancer care. That's why your skin gets burnt. That's why your gut lining gets damaged. And that's why you have all the symptoms of loss of that lining cells. However, because you can preserve a population of stem cells in their native state, once the damage is stopped, once the injury is stopped, they can go back and renovate and remodel the GI tract. And by the way, we all know that you get a bad GI virus and you suddenly have, terrible GI symptoms from that. After the virus is cleared, your gut will remodel itself and you'll restore yourself to a normal state of gut health. You won't have any of the symptoms of that gastrointestinal virus.
Because they rapidly divide, I would assume they also recover faster too, right? So it's like, you get a sunburn, you obviously damage your skin. Usually within a week, you're back. Sometimes even weirdly enough, my skin looks better after a sunburn, and it's like I get a new. It's almost like I've just put myself through the ringer and get a new batch of skin coming through.
Yeah, look, renovation and repair has benefits, right? Your house will stay nicer longer if you continually upgrade it and renovate and repair it. You're pointing out to the same thing that happens in skin or other parts of our body. There's a use it or lose it phenomenon in cell biology as well. And so I would argue, I'll give you an example of where I think the use it or lose it phenomenon historically is evident. What's the longest sustained therapeutic modality in the history of humans? It's therapeutic bleeding, bloodletting.
Yeah.
Remember? Yeah. That for 600-700 years, that was the one thing doctors could do. You didn't feel well, you came and got bled. Part of what's happening there is you're doing two things. By bleeding, you're cleaning out not only the blood cells that are circulating, but you're also cleaning out the plasma in that blood. And that plasma contains lots of toxic chemicals and proteins and antibodies and antigens and things that you want to get out of the system, like you want to clean your oil. You want to change your oil. The other thing that the bleeding does is it stimulates your bone marrow to make more stem cells and make more blood cells. And so there is a use it or lose it phenomenon that if you challenge your stem cell population, you actually can preserve the quality of that population.
I could see that. you're almost creating a slight hormetic stressor just in a different environment than we're used to looking. And I've always been a fan of dumping blood. I used to pretty religiously go and donate blood just to dump blood. I feel better after I do it.
There's evidence that people who routinely donate blood actually have enhanced health. And there's an entire new phenomenon that's being exploited, for example, at Fountain Life and elsewhere. It's called total plasma exchange. So there's something beneficial about bleeding, separating the plasma fraction from the blood cells, resuspending the blood cells in crystal clear fluid like saline, and then getting those cells back while taking the plasma and disposing of it. And what we're finding is that plasma is filled with pro-inflammatory molecules, old antibodies, things that gunk up the works. Just like your oil, which circulates through your engine and picks up metal particles, breakdown products of combustion, the same thing happens in your plasma. And so I actually believe that total plasma exchange, getting rid of the old bad plasma, and stimulating your endogenous population of stem cells have health benefits.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I want to talk a little bit about follistatin as well, because you hear this thing of follistatin therapy, but I know there's ways to get it through food as well. What is follistatin, and can we talk about sort of the relationship between myostatin and follistatin? And again, we talked about this in another video, but there's a lot of context here.
So, because you and I both agree, muscle is one of the most important organs in our body. It's one of the largest organs. It's one of the most metabolically active. It is one of the most synthetic organs in our body. Anything we can do to maintain quality and quantity of muscle tissue has benefits. Well, one of the things we learned quite a while ago, and a lot of people, particularly in the athletic and bodybuilding community and so on, who were looking to build muscle mass, recognized that there was a protein system called myostatin that was responsible for suppressing the unfettered growth of muscle tissue. And people said, well, why would you make a protein that stops you from building muscle tissue? Well, it turns out that because we reach a maximum skeletal size around puberty and be a little shortly after puberty, if you continue to build muscle mass and muscle strength without changing the bones, you actually can create damage to your bones by subjecting them to repetitive stress. A stress fracture is a repetitive muscle contraction injury to bone tissue. Now, in evolution, if humans suffered stress fractures because something didn't check and stop muscle from growing, they would be at risk of being killed in their environment, be subject to predation. A guy out in the jungle would be eaten by a lion. So the bottom line is that myostatin has a selective benefit by keeping a balance between the strength of your muscle and the integrity of your bone. That's why myostatin exists. But in today's world, where you may want to enhance muscle health, mass, because you're not subjected to the same predatory threats, there has been shown to be ways to reduce the activity of myostatin by antagonizing it with a corresponding protein called follistatin. And follistatin, as you've mentioned, is available in a number of nutrients. Follistatin is rich in eggs, for example, and other natural foods. And follistatin will counteract some of the activity of myostatin and allow you to build muscle. And as you know, there's a specific breed of animals that's characteristically known for being myostatin free. These are the Belgian blue bulls, who just grazing in the field develop massive lean muscle mass. They do so because they don't have the gene that makes myostatin. So some of the therapies targeting myostatin are looking at ways to manipulate the gene, either splice it out, block it, or in some cases increase the production of follistatin in order to create a shift in the balance from muscle inhibition to muscle growth.
Wow. I mean, imagine if you could selectively knock it out in a given area of the body for like atrophy after an accident or something, right? I mean, it's an
area they've been studying for things like muscular dystrophies.
Yeah, that's really wild. A question on that, is there a potential feedback mechanism between bone density and myostatin? I don't know if this is even looked at. If someone has more bone density and the body says, hey, this body can handle more muscle, so reduce myostatin.
Great question. We think that when you reach sort of your maximal skeletal mass, that's when myostatin gets upregulated to maintain it. So if you're continuing to build muscle integrity and strength and density, you'll continue to be able to build more muscle. Myostatin doesn't get turned on until you reach that point where you want to create the balance.
So you want to get as jacked as possible before 12.
Get jacked as possible. And by the way, as you know, your muscle density will increase as you're building muscle, right? I mean, your bone density will increase as you're building muscle. So there is a yin and a yang here.
That's really wild. Yeah, I'm increasingly interested in that entire side of things, because obviously, complete knockout of myostatin probably wouldn't be a good thing, but, I could see how just from the sake of the longevity discussion. It's like, okay, like especially when you've got people that don't maybe have the anabolic hormones in their favor as they get older, right? And like, okay, they're worried about sarcopenia, they're worried about this kind of thing. Is there a way that we can make muscle building a little bit easier for them without jacking with their hormones?
I mean, we fortunately live in an era where there are brilliant protein engineers, antibody engineers, and so on, who will figure a way to fine-tune the balance between myostatin and bone density so that you get the benefits of enhanced muscle growth and retention without the threat to your integrity of your bones.
No, it's an exciting time for sure. Well, Dr. Hariri, where can everyone find you?
So I'm thrilled if people follow my podcast at pilotinghealth.com. That connects my aviation world with my medical world. They can also follow me in social media at Dr. Bob Hariri, DrBobHariri. And they can also look at my company's Cellularity and Fountain Life online and get a lot of information there. And obviously, they can take a look at our book that Tony, Peter, and I put together, Life Force.
Perfect. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Tom.